following segment is taken from the full video, Why I Don't Trust the Media. If you'd like to watch the piece in its entirety, follow the link in the description. So in the previous section, we talked about the perverse incentive to sensationalize a story, to hype it up, to make it sexier than it otherwise would be. In this section, we're going to talk about the perverse incentive to play to the audience, to become captured by an audience, and the incentive to just feed that audience what you think they want to hear rather than be an objective source of information to the extent that we can be. I don't think it's possible for a human with limited knowledge to ever be entirely objective. We're not gods. But it's a goal to strive for. It's a target to aim at. And you can tell when somebody is trying to be objective, when they're trying to, get to their conclusion with a minimal amount of assumptions. And the reasoning is based heavily on verifiable facts. And you can tell when people aren't doing that. You can tell when people are throwing in a bunch of assumptions, cherry picking which facts they want to emphasize and which facts they want to de-emphasize. Well, I think it's impossible to be perfectly objective. It's easy to spot who's trying and who's not. One of the things George Washington warned about in his farewell address was the dangers of partisanship, the spirit of partisanship, and I'm paraphrasing. He saw and anticipated how it could tear the country apart. The tribal sort of loyalty to a political party brings out the worst in men's natures. It can warp their ability to think clearly, it can warp their moral judgments, and it can turn men into hypocrites. I think it is apparent that partisanship can corrupt the minds and moral judgments of men. So I can see how a morally corrupt person, someone who's corrupted by the spirit of partisanship, I can see them making excuses for terrible behavior when it's done by a group whose cause they're sympathetic to. I can see them being more lenient with that group when they're engaging in, say, back to our Jan 6th / Summer of Love example. I could see them making excuses for rioting and looting and assaulting police officers when they think the cause is just, and then without blinking, harshly and severely condemning that behavior when it's perpetrated by a group of people whose cause they're not sympathetic to. So think of Kamala Harris raising money to help bail out the people that were arrested during BLM riots versus how she would treat, somebody arrested during the Jan 6 riots. One case will bend over backwards to make excuses for the people behaving in terrible behavior. And the other case will treat you as a treasonous insurrectionist for merely being present. Which, by the way, is no small thing. If half the country believes that we have a two-tiered justice system and you're treated totally different before the law, depending on your politics, that is the recipe for the collapse of a system. Now, all that aside, I can see why a partisan would do that, and that's why I think partisanship warps the morality of men. However, journalists are supposed to be better than this. They're supposed to be aiming for that target of objectivity. I mean, if you went to journalism school, you went to college and studied principles and ethics of being a journalist, and then you went out and got hired on by a company whose job it is to be engaged in that business of journalism. I mean, you should be a very well-grounded person in this profession. And the company you work for should have all sorts of checks and balances to help make sure that everybody's being as objective as possible. And if you're not doing that, and the company that you work for is not doing that, are you really a journalist at that point? Or are you just playing one on TV or in print or on the radio or whatever your medium is? Are you the journalistic equivalent of a quack doctor? Somebody who's corrupt and incompetent, but they're just trying to make a buck. They're not really trying to do what's in the best interest of their patient. They're just trying to sell them a particular treatment or in some way milk them out for all they're worth. And that's where I'm sort of leading to when I talk about playing to the audience. I have a friend who I'm going to label the political guy. And just like my friend the talebearer, if you live long enough, you probably know a political guy or two. A guy who just has an unhealthy obsession with politics. And some people that know me might even label me as the political guy. So I can kind of relate to him because I have deep interest in politics. Now, I like to think that I'm a more chill political guy and I'm fairly well adjusted. For the most part, I enjoy engaging in political discussions, but on a intellectual level, on an analytical level, I like to look at different ideas and look at look at the evidence and sort of weigh different policies against one another and try to wrestle my way to a better understanding of reality and a version that's closer to the truth. But some political guys are not that well adjusted. Some of them are heavily emotionally invested in a political ideology, and they seem to be in a constant state of agitation, which I don't think ultimately is healthy for them or productive. So, my friend, the political guy, is that way. He looks at his side, the party he identifies with rose colored glasses, overlooks their transgressions, and then he takes a microscope to the other side, the people that he doesn't align with politically. To borrow from the New Testament, he's a classic example of straining at a gnat and swallowing the camel. Beholding the sliver in his brother's eye, but not perceiving the log that's wedged into his own eye. And he's constantly agitated about politics, probably because he consumes way too much of the junk news that I'm criticizing in this video. It's certainly not helping the matter, but my friend is basically written off half the country. He thinks half the country is stupid and evil and racist. And he thinks the country would be much better off if these people just didn't exist, or, second from that, they were just subjugated, just forced to do what he thinks they should do. And he would seem to be perfectly comfortable with the state just forcing his views on the half of the country that doesn't agree with him. Now, my friend is an actual individual. There is a person I'm thinking of when I'm describing this person, but they could just as easily be an amalgamation of millions of people. There's millions of people that are of the same political persuasion as my friend and who basically think the same way. And my friend has a counterpart because there's millions of people that are basically the mirror image of my friend on the other side. They have the opposite view on politics, identify with the other party, and think the same thing in reverse. They think they're the moral, just people, the smart people, the good people on the right side of history, and the people on the other side are the crazy, evil, stupid people that we would all be better off if they didn't exist. And since we can't wish them all into the cornfield, we'd be better off if they were just subjugated and forced to go along with what they think is the best way of doing things. Now, my friend likes to poke the bear and engage in political discussions. If you would call it a discussion, mostly it's just him hurling partisan talking points and wild accusations at the people that he disagrees with in politics and their supporters, the people that live in the countryside and have a different political bent than he does. And I don't have any ill will towards this guy. I mean, on a human level, he's a decent person. But on the subject of politics, he's kind of a raving lunatic. So how do I engage with this person? Well, for the most part, I try to avoid political discussions with them because they're unfruitful. I'm going to calmly state my views and the reasons why I think them, and he's going to get all worked up and rant and rave and throw insults and ad hominems and make terrible arguments and hurl them at the people that he disagrees with. I'm not really his therapist. It's not my job to sort through all the BS and all the contradictions that are bouncing around in his gray matter. If I do engage with him on the discussion of politics, I'm very careful to just try to carefully point things out that I think might get him to open his mind a little bit. He'll be ranting and raving, and I'll say, well, okay, but what about this little fact that doesn't seem to fit so neatly into your worldview? Where does that fit in? And I'll sort of observe to see if he really considers it, or if he just dismisses it outright, or if he just changes the subject and starts ranting about the next thing. I guess my goal with this person is just to try to see if I can get them to see that there are reasonable people outside of his echo chamber that have different viewpoints and have good reasons for holding those viewpoints. Maybe just pull him back from the edge a little bit. Because like I said, I have no ill will towards this person. Consider him a friend. But let's say I wasn't his friend. Let's say I saw him as less of a friend, less of a human even, and more of a commodity to be exploited for my own purposes. And I thought to myself, how can I take all this guy's energy and how can I use his distorted view of reality to my advantage so I can profit from it? Well, instead of trying to get him to think, and instead of trying to pull him out of his echo chamber and see that the world is a little bit bigger than his worldview is accounting for, I could take the opposite approach. I could just hold my tongue when I see him completely misstating reality, and I could not throw out those data points and that evidence that might moderate his view slightly. I could just, basically tell him what he wants to hear. And then when he gets all worked up, I could pretend to get worked up right along with him. Yeah, those other people, they're terrible. We should use the state to just force them to go along with our point of view. Then he's going to see me as a fellow traveler. He's going to say, yeah, Fletch, that guy really gets it. And he's going to have a more favorable opinion of me because I confirm his biases for him. I make him feel fuzzy and comfortable. I tell him that, he's one of the good guys. He's on the right side of history. And I denigrate his enemies for him, or his perceived enemies. Yeah, those people over there that you don't like. Not only are they as bad as you think they are, but they're worse. Hey, look at this story. Look what I saw this guy saying. And I could start feeding him a bunch of negative stories about the people that he's already inclined to dislike. Rather than ever play devil's advocate or try to get him to consider another point of view, I'll just constantly reinforce what he already thinks. Now, why would I do this? Well, because it'll make him really comfortable around me. He'll seek me out and want to come over to talk to me and vent his frustrations, and I can stir the pot and tell him he's right and the other people are all wrong, and give him a, hey, that a boy, keep up the good fight. And then his guard will be down around me, and when I need something from him, or I want to take advantage of him in some way, he's more apt to trust me. Now, thankfully for my friend's sake, I'm not a Machiavellian asshole, but I think that other people are, particularly people in the news entertainment industry. And that's why professional journalists who should know better, and businesses that are supposedly engaged in the business of journalism, many of them will color stories a certain way in order to play to their audience. To basically do what I was just describing to my friend on a larger scale. Playing to the audience, telling them what they want to hear, coloring stories a certain way, emphasizing some facts that support the narrative that the audience already believes, and de-emphasizing facts that would start to poke holes in their echo chamber. And the reason they would do something like this is very similar to the reason that they would sensationalize a story, hype it up and make it more of a story than it otherwise would be. Because it's going to keep that audience coming back. And then they can monetize that audience. This is, for example, why some networks had nothing but negative stories about Trump for 4 years. Now, no public figure is above reproach, and they all deserve to be criticized and have their words and actions scrutinized because they're in a position of public trust. However, am I to believe that everything he said and did was wrong for 4 years? Likewise, in the other camp. Am I to believe that nothing the progressives ever do is justified or warranted, or at least they have good arguments for why they pursue a certain policy? So to summarize, that's the second perverse incentive I think media faces in today's market. And really, it's always faced that perverse incentive. There's been newspapers that favor one perspective over another, going back to the founding of the country, and no doubt before that. A notable difference, I would say, is that we're in the information age, and information moves a lot faster. So instead of, getting worked up once a month when you read the paper, now you can go online or turn on your TV and get all worked up and bent out of shape about stuff on a daily basis. All day long, even if you want to. I mean, we have the 24-hour news channels now. So they can constantly be reinforcing your biases, and they can constantly be demonizing the people that you don't agree with. And they can sell you lots and lots of stuff during the advertisements. So to close up this section, a question I might ask the audience is that healthy? Is it good for people's mental, physical, spiritual health to be consuming that kind of hyper-partisan content on a regular basis? Or is it the news entertainment industry equivalent of going to McDonald's for your 3 square meals a day? Is it making somebody else rich to the detriment of your own well-being? People often think of like Fox News as a competitor to CNN or MSNBC. Well, are they really competing for the same thing? I mean, one is selling a product catered to a conservative audience, and one is selling a product catered to a progressive audience. And they play off of one another and criticize each other, but how much of a competition are they really in? I mean, do you honestly think a conservative is going to watch Rachel Maddow, for instance, and be converted? Think, oh yeah, she makes a really good point there. Or are they going to see her as the raving partisan lunatic that she probably is? Or think of Glenn Beck when he used to be on Fox during the Obama administration. Do you think any progressives tuned into Fox and listened to Glenn Beck and thought, "Wow, I'm going to have to rethink my whole worldview now. This guy really challenged my assumptions"? Or did they simply dismiss him as a raving lunatic? But you know who does tune into Rachel Maddow every day to get their talking points from is partisans on one side of the aisle. And you know who does or did tune into Glenn Beck back in the day was partisans on the other side. So are they genuine people doing good journalism, or are they entertainers just placating an audience? And that's something thinking adults have to work out for themselves, but my point is to be skeptical of the people in the media, even and especially the people that you tend to agree with. Because even if they are genuine and this is not just a game to them, something they do to make a living, even if they genuinely believe the things that they're telling you, well, they're still just going to reinforce your biases because they share the same perspective that you do. Intellectual growth often comes from having an engaging conversation, or at least listening to people with different perspectives than your own. People that are genuine, however, that are reasonable and making good faith arguments. But my challenge to the viewer would be to be skeptical. Try to sift out who's being genuine and who's honestly presenting their point of view, and who's simply just saying things to placate an audience. You've been watching the Fletch Report. If you're hearing this, it means you've made it to the end of the video. But before you click onto the next thing and continue down whatever rabbit hole you're on YouTube or Rumble, I've got a small favor to ask. If you found value in my content and you want to help the channel out, the best thing you can do is share it with somebody else that you think will find value in it. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more. Links to the channel on YouTube and Rumble will be provided below. Additionally, I'm making a Facebook page for the channel as well as a X/formerly Twitter. Feel free to follow me on those platforms as well. If you're feeling exceptionally generous, provided in the description below will be a link to Buy Me a Coffee, which is the online equivalent of a tip jar. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting the channel.